Night Court ASMR. Hello, darling, and welcome to the Night Court. As always, it's your choice, and you have chosen a bedtime story. A relaxing tale to invite sweet sleep and pleasant dreams for all listeners. I hope it does that. And I'm excited to get started, but I also think these are sort of fun to read because they're very bizarre. Not as straightforward as one would think. I thought, let's read some fairy tales. And the Brothers Grimm, in their original format, turn out to be quite strange. So I'm excited to kind of read these and chat through them. I don't know how many I'll get to in this video, but we'll see. Before we get into that and sort of why some of this is so strange, though, let's take a moment to prepare your space and yourself to attend the night court. Ensure that you will be undisturbed and unrequired to do anything but listen, engage, and enjoy for the duration. Because this session is designed to induce blissful relaxation and hopefully sleep in this case, although, of course, you could listen to fairy tales at any time. I think it's appropriate for when you're in bed with the covers pulled up tight. And now, darling, if you haven't already, turn down the lights. Sit or lie back in a comfortable position. Ensure that your neck, legs, and back are supported. And notice how your attention to these details is already creating a sense of ease. As your shoulders relax and your jaw unclenches and perhaps your eyes close, your ears open. And they are attuned to each small sound, perhaps already visualizing the dark, star-flecked night, the glow of a city on the horizon, the cool mountain wind whispering, and the dark embrace of the night. Okay, the Brothers Grimm. Let's get into it. I have a really pretty copy of this book, and I like the way these types of covers sound, so I'll probably play with it a little bit. We're about to read selected Grimm's fairy tales. Just a few of them by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. I'll start with the inside cover. Give you a bit of background. The names of Jacob and Wilhelm, or Jacob and Wilhelm, I suppose, may have gone forgotten in our collective memory, but they shall retain eternal recognition as the Brothers Grimm. German linguistics, academics imbued by a romanticist sense of nationalism that greatly valued tradition, they dedicated a large part of their lives to studying folklore and publishing children's stories that were to become universal in space and eternal in time. And they certainly have done that, haven't they? There are so many versions of these tales and movies about the Brothers Grimm. Won't get into all of those adaptations, but around 170 of their 211 stories underwent publication in just a single decade, running from 1812 to 1822. However, at the beginning they did not gain much of an audience, as they were not the typical tales for children, with their contents including an abundance of scientific information, controversial themes, and representations of sexuality and violence, hitherto always excluded. While their initial reception remained lukewarm, their present sense has been a constant in the childhoods of every generation raised reading them since. Now, I, like many of us, have seen the Disney sort of rendition editions of all of these stories, and they published far more than most of us have actually seen films of or other adaptations of course. And my understanding has always been that these were intended as morality tales, as this type of fairy tale is typically meant to make children, in any case, behave a certain way. But reading through some of these, and I haven't read all the ones in this book, maybe I'll read some of them for the first time with you today. But some of them, I find it very difficult to sort of extract the moral. It's fascinating. And we've all seen so many different iterations of these stories that I found it fascinating to go back to the originals, some of which I'd read as a kid, and I must have had a different take on them as a child. It's amazing to think of how much our framing can change from childhood to adulthood. I'll start with the Frog Prince, for example. I had a totally different memory of this or impression of it. Anyway, we can get into it. The 13 Fantastic Tales of the Brothers Grimm that we are publishing here form part of an endless collection with its powers and enchantment having marked generations ever since the early 19th century. Marked is one word for it, traumatized might be another. With a shadowy tone of mystery, magic, humor, and violence. Indeed. These stories set their roots in Western folklore to convey warnings to the youngest that not everything turns out roses. The true adventures and challenges of life require strength of will and, still more importantly, some imagination. The Frog Prince, because why not? In the old times, when it was still of some use to wish for things one wanted, there lived a king whose daughters were all handsome, but the youngest was so beautiful that the sun himself, who has seen so much, wondered each time he shone over her because of her beauty. Near the royal castle there was a dark wood, and in the wood, under an old linden tree, was a well. And when the day was hot, the king's daughter used to go forth into the wood and sit by the brink of the cool well. And if the time seemed long, she would take out a golden ball and throw it up and catch it again. And this was her favorite pastime. Now it happened one day that the golden ball, instead of falling back into the maiden's little hand, which had sent it aloft, dropped to the ground near the edge of the well and rolled in. The king's daughter followed it with her eyes as it sank, but the well was deep, so deep that the bottom could not be seen. Then she began to weep, and she wept and wept, as if she could never be comforted. And in the midst of her weeping, she heard a voice saying to her, "What ails thee, king's daughter? Thy tears would melt a heart of stone." And when she looked to see where the voice had come from, there was nothing but a frog stretching his thick, ugly head out of the water. "How is it you, old waddler?" said she. "I weep because my golden ball has fallen into the well." I don't know why they're British. These are German tales, but they're British. "Never mind, do not weep," answered the frog. "I can help you. But what will you give me if I fetch up your ball again?" "Whatever you like, dear frog," said she. "Any of my clothes, my pearls and jewels, or even the golden crown that I wear." "Thy clothes, thy pearls and jewels, and thy golden crown are not for me," answered the frog. "But if thou wouldst love me, and have me for thy companion and playfellow, and let me sit by thee at table, and eat from thy plate, and drink from thy cup, and sleep in thy little bed, if thou wouldst promise all these, then would I dive below the water, and fetch thee thy golden ball again." "Oh yes," she answered, "I will promise it all, whatever you want, if you will only get me my ball again." But she thought to herself, what nonsense he talks, as if he could do anything but sit in the water and croak with the other frogs, or could possibly be anyone's companion. But the frog, as soon as he heard her promise, drew his head under the water and sank down out of sight. But after a while he came to the surface again with the ball in his mouth, and he threw it on the grass. My hair is in my way. The king's daughter was overjoyed to see her pretty plaything again, and she caught it up and ran off with it. "Stop, stop," cried the frog. "Take me up too. I cannot run as fast as you." But it was of no use, for croak, croak after her as he might, she would not listen to him, but made haste home, and very soon forgot all about the poor frog, who had to betake himself to his well again. The next day, when the king's daughter was sitting at table with the king and all the court, and eating from her golden plate, there came something pitter-patter up the marble stairs, and then there came a knocking at the door and a voice crying, "Youngest king's daughter, let me in." And she got up and ran to see who it could be. But when she opened the door, there was the frog sitting outside. Then she shut the door hastily and went back to her seat, feeling very uneasy. The king noticed how quickly her heart was beating and said, "My child, what are you afraid of? Is there a giant standing at the door, ready to carry you away?" "Oh, no," answered she, "no giant, but a horrid frog." "Oh, no," answered she. "And what does the frog want?" asked the king. "Oh, dear father," answered she, "when I was sitting by the well yesterday and playing with my golden ball, it fell into the water, and while I was crying for the loss of it, the frog came and got it again for me on condition that I would let him be my companion. But I never thought that he could leave the water and come after me. But now there he is outside the door, and he wants to come in to me." And then they all heard him knocking the second time and crying, "Youngest king's daughter, open to me. By the well water, what promised you me? Youngest king's daughter, now open to me." "That which thou hast promised, thou must perform," said the king. "So go now and let him in." So she went and opened the door, and the frog hopped in, followed at her heels till she reached her chair. Then he stopped and cried, "Lift me up to sit by you." Oh, but she delayed doing so until the king ordered her. When once the frog was on the chair, he wanted to get on the table, and there he sat and said, "Now push your golden plate a little nearer, so that we may eat together." And so she did. But everybody might see how unwilling she was, and the frog feasted heartily, but every morsel seemed to stick in her throat. "I've had enough now," said the frog at last, "and as I am tired, you may carry me to your room and make ready your silken bed, and we will lie down and go to sleep." Then the king's daughter began to weep. Brat that she is. Okay, this is killing me. This little jerk of a princess. She was afraid of the cold frog, that nothing would satisfy him, but he must sleep in her pretty clean bed. Now the king grew angry with her, saying, "That which thou hast promised in thy time of necessity must thou now perform." So she picked up the frog with her finger and thumb, carried him upstairs, and put him in the corner. And when she had lain down to sleep, he came creeping up, saying, "I am tired and want sleep as much as you. Take me up, or I will tell your father." Then she felt beside herself with rage, and picking him up, she threw him with all her strength against the wall, crying, "Now will you be quiet, you horrid frog?" But as he fell, he ceased to be a frog, and became all at once a prince with beautiful and kind eyes. And it came to pass that with her father's consent, they became bride and bridegroom, and he told her how a wicked witch had bound him by her spells, and how no one but she alone could have released him, and that they two would go together to his father's kingdom. And there came to the door a carriage drawn by 8 white horses, with white plumes on their heads, and with golden harness. And behind the carriage was standing faithful Henry, the servant of the young prince. Now faithful Henry had suffered such care and pain when his master was turned into a frog, that he had been obliged to wear the 3 iron bands over his heart, to keep it from breaking with trouble and anxiety. When the carriage started to take the prince to his kingdom, and faithful Henry had helped them both in, he got up behind and was full of joy at his master's deliverance. And when they had gone a part of the way, the prince heard a sound at the back of the carriage, as if something had broken, and he turned round and cried, "Henry, the wheel must be breaking." But Henry answered, "The wheel does not break, 'tis the band round my heart, that, to lessen its ache, when I grieve for your sake, I bound round my heart." This is so weird. Again and once again, there's the same sound, and the prince thought it must be the wheel breaking. But it was the breaking of the other bands from faithful Henry's heart, because it was now so relieved and happy. Okay. Let's break this down. This little brat of a princess makes a promise that she has no intention of keeping because she's so haughty. And she just wants her golden ball, and is obviously, by her own, understanding of how beautiful everyone thinks she is, including the sun, and probably by having been spoiled, I don't know, thinks that she is not worthy of the company, or excuse me, that the frog is not worthy of her company. She goes home. He comes in, calls in the promise that she made, which to me seems totally fair. And her father, in I think a bit of a surprising turn, says, "No, you have to keep your promise." And on the one hand, I read that and I think that's good. Okay, let's teach her that she needs to behave. And then on the other, I think, but now the father is forcing her, without her consent, to let this creature sleep with her and eat with her. So I'm of two minds here. This is weird, and I'm still not sure what the story is actually trying to convey in the end. What it does manage to convey, I think, is don't be a jerk and you should keep your promises, but also young ladies, listen to your father, right? And then also she's rewarded despite never having done the sort of right thing, right? She literally violently throws this creature against the wall and could hurt or kill him or maim him. And just because she doesn't yet know he's a handsome prince, somehow that behavior's okay. And then it seems rewarded for what I don't know, because she never actually did what she said she would do. She was not a loving companion. So on the one hand, I'm frustrated because she's being sort of forced into this, but then on the other, she's not fulfilling her promise, and at no point in the story is she kind or, displaying any sort of virtue, worthwhile behavior. And then all of a sudden, from seemingly, as far as story goes, there's not any, instant, there's nothing inciting that causes him to turn into a human at that time, right? It's not her love for him or her kindness or something, invoked his ability to show his true form. It just makes no sense in terms of formula to me. So we have all of these competing, sort of confusing lessons that she's being taught or we're being taught. And then in the end, this random servant is having the bands around his heart released, and that's what we end the story with. Okay. I know that these are, I think this might be abridged, although the book itself doesn't say so. I have a feeling that the stories themselves might have been abridged for this edition. I had a book when I was a small child of their fairy tales, but I don't. Again, like I said before, it's hard to sort of remember. I feel like I'm just going on a tirade, but this is just crazy to me. I'm so curious to see, because I just don't quite remember from my childhood how some of these other stories go, and whether the lesson in the end really makes sense. But that Frog Prince one is baffling to me. I see nobody behaving well. I mean, the prince actually, for his part, made a fair bargain and she reneged. I don't know what it's trying to teach us, except listen to your father or something, and you'll be rewarded with a beautiful mate. Okay, let's try by all accounts, are quite far afield from the original source material. Okay. Hansel and Gretel. Near a great forest there lived a poor woodcutter and his wife, and his 2 children. The boy's name was Hansel, and the girl's name Gretel. They had very little to bite or to sup, and once, when there was great dearth in the land, the man could not even gain the daily bread. As he lay in bed one night, thinking of this and turning and tossing, he sighed heavily and said to his wife, "What will become of us? We cannot even feed our children. There is nothing left for ourselves." "I will tell you what, husband," answered the wife. "We will take the children early in the morning into the forest, where it is thickest. We will make them a fire, and we will give each of them a piece of bread. Then we will go to our work and leave them alone. They will never find the way home again, and we shall be quit of them." "No, wife," said the man. "I cannot do that. I cannot find in my heart to take my children into the forest and leave them there alone. The wild animals would soon come and devour them." "Oh, you fool," said she. "Then we all 4 starve. You had better get the coffins ready." And she left him no peace until he consented. "But I really pity the poor children," said the man. The 2 children had not been able to sleep for hunger, and had heard what their stepmother had said to their father. Gretel wept bitterly and said to Hansel, "It's all over with us." "Do be quiet," Gretel said Hansel, "and do not fret. I will manage something." And when the parents had gone to sleep, he got up, put on his little coat, opened the back door, and slipped out. The moon was shining brightly, and the white flints that lay in front of the house glistened like pieces of silver. Hansel stooped and filled a little pocket of his coat as full as it would hold. Then he went back again and said to Gretel, "Be easy, dear little sister, and go to sleep quietly. God will not forsake us," and laid himself down again in his bed. When the day was breaking and before the sun had risen, the wife came and awakened the 2 children, saying, "Get up, you lazy bones, we are going into the forest to cut wood." "Get up." Then she gave each of them a piece of bread and said, "That is for dinner, and you must not eat it before then, for you will get no more." Gretel carried the bread under her apron, for Hansel had his pockets full of the flints. Then they set off all together on their way to the forest. When they had gone a little way, Hansel stood and looked back toward the house, and this he did again and again, till his father said to him, "Hansel, what are you looking at? Take care not to forget your legs." "Oh, father," said Hansel, "I am looking at my little white kitten, who is sitting up on the roof to bid me goodbye." "You young fool," said the woman, "that is not your kitten, but the sunshine on the chimney pot." Of course, Hansel had not been looking at his kitten, but had been looking every now and then, taking a flint from his pocket and dropping it on the road. When they reached the middle of the forest, the father told the children to collect wood to make a fire and to keep them warm. And Hansel and Gretel gathered brushwood enough for a little mountain, and it was set on fire. And when the flame was burning quite high, the wife said, "Now lie down by the fire and rest yourselves, you children. We will go and cut wood, and when we are ready, we will come and fetch you." So Hansel and Gretel sat by the fire, and at noon they each ate their pieces of bread. They thought their father was in the wood all the time, as they seemed to hear the strokes of the axe, but really it was only a dry branch hanging to a withered tree that the wind moved to and fro. So when they had stayed there a long time, their eyelids closed with weariness, and they fell fast asleep. When at last they woke, it was night, and Gretel began to cry and said, "How shall we ever get out of this wood?" But Hansel comforted her, saying, "Wait a little while longer, until the moon rises, and then we can easily find the way home." And when the full moon got up, Hansel took his little sister by the hand and followed the way where the flint stones shone like silver, and showed them the road. They walked the whole night through, and at the break of day they came to their father's house. They knocked at the door, and when the wife opened it and saw that it was Hansel and Gretel, she said, "You naughty children, why did you sleep so long in the wood? We thought you were never coming home again." But the father was glad, for it had gone to his heart to leave them both in the woods alone. What a guy. I mean, at least he felt bad. Anyway, okay, back to the story. Not very long after that, there was again great scarcity in those parts, and the children heard their mother say at night in bed to their father, "Everything is finished up. We have only half a loaf, and after the tale comes to an end, the children must be off. We will take them farther into the wood this time, so that they shall not be able to find the way back again. There is no other way to manage. The man felt sad at heart, and he thought it would be better to share one last morsel with one's children. But the wife would listen to nothing that he said, but scolded and reproached him. And who says A must say B too, and when a man is given in once, he has to do it a second time. But the children were not asleep, and had heard all the talk. When the parents had gone to sleep, Hansel got up to go out and get more flint stones, as he did before. But the wife had locked the door, and Hansel could not get out. But he comforted his little sister and said, "Don't cry, Gretel, and go to sleep quietly, and God will help us." Early the next morning the wife came and pulled the children out of bed. She gave them each a little piece of bread, less than before, and on the way to the wood Hansel crumpled the bread in his pocket and often stopped to throw a crumb on the ground. "Hansel, what are you stopping behind and staring for?" said the father. "I am looking at my little pigeon, sitting on the roof to say goodbye to me," answered Hansel. "You fool," said the wife, "there's no pigeon, but the morning sun shining on the chimney pots." Hansel went on as before and strewed breadcrumbs all along the road. The woman led the children far into the wood, where they had never before been in all their lives, and again there was a large fire made, and the mother said, "Sit still there, you young children, and when you are tired you can go to sleep. We are going into the forest to cut wood, and in the evening, when we are ready to go home, we will come and fetch you." So when noon came, Gretel shared her bread with Hansel, who had strewed along his on the road. Then they went to sleep, and the evening passed, and no one came for the poor children. When they awoke, it was a dark night, and Hansel comforted his little sister and said, "Wait a little, Gretel, until the moon gets up. Then we shall be able to see the way home by the crumbs of bread that I have scattered along it." So when the moon rose, they got up, but they could find no crumbs of bread, for the birds of the woods and of the fields had come and picked them up. Hansel thought they might find the way all the same, but they could not. They went on all that night and the next day from the morning until the evening, but they could not find the way out of the wood. Now they were very hungry, for they had nothing to eat but the few berries they could pick up. And when they were so tired that they could not any longer drag themselves along, they lay down under a tree and fell asleep. It was now the third morning since they had left their father's house. They were always trying to get back to it, but instead of that, they only found themselves farther in the wood, and if help had not soon come, they would have been starved. About noon they saw a pretty snow-white bird sitting on a bough and singing so sweetly that they stopped to listen. And when he had finished, the bird spread his wings and flew before them, and they followed him. They came to a little house, and the bird perched on the roof, and when they came near, they saw that the house was built of bread and roofed with cakes, and the window was of transparent sugar. "We will have some of this," said Hansel, "and to make a fine meal, I will eat a piece of the roof, Gretel, and you can have some of the windows. They taste sweeter." Sweet Hansel. So Hansel reached up and broke off a bit of the roof just to see how it tasted, and Gretel stood by the window and gnawed at it. Then they heard a thin voice call out from inside, "Nibble, nibble, nibble like a mouse, who's nibbling at my house?" And the children answered, "Never mind, it is the wind." And they went on eating, never disturbing themselves. Hansel, who found that the roof tasted very nice, took down a great piece of it, and Gretel pulled out a large round window pane and sat her down and began upon it. Then the door opened, and an aged woman came out, leaning upon a crutch. Hansel and Gretel felt very frightened, and let fall what they had in their hands. The old woman, however, nodded her head and said, "Ah, my dear children, now come you here, and you must come indoors and stay with me. You will be no trouble." So she took them each by the hand and led them into her little house, and they were found a good meal laid out, of milk and pancakes with sugar, apples, and nuts. After that she showed them 2 little white beds, and Hansel and Gretel laid themselves down on them and thought they were in heaven. The old woman, although her behavior was so kind, was a wicked witch, who lay in wait for children and had built the house on purpose to entice them. When they were once inside, she used to kill them, cook them, and eat them. And then it was a feast day with her. The witch's eyes were red, and she could not see very far, but she had a keen scent, like the beasts, and knew very well when human creatures were near. When she knew that Hansel and Gretel were coming, she gave a spiteful laugh and said triumphantly, "I have them, and they shall not escape me." Early in the morning, before the children were awake, she got up to look at them. And as they lay sleeping so peacefully with round, rosy cheeks, she said to herself, "What a fine feast I shall have." Then she grasped Hansel with her withered hand and led him into a little table and shut him up behind a grating, and call and scream as he might, it was no good. Then she went back to Gretel and shook her, crying, "Get up, lazy bones, fetch water and cook something nice for your brother. He is outside in the stable, and must be fattened up. And when he is fat enough, I will eat him." Gretel began to weep bitterly, but it was of no use. She had to do what the wicked witch bade her. And so the best kind of victuals was cooked for poor Hansel, while Gretel got nothing but crab shells. Each morning the old woman visited the little stable and cried, "Hansel, stretch out your finger that I may tell if you will soon be fat enough." Hansel, however, used to hold out a little bone, and the old woman, who had weak eyes, could not see what it was, and supposing it to be Hansel's finger, wondered very much that it was not getting fatter. Clever Hansel. When 4 weeks had passed and Hansel seemed to remain so thin, she lost patience and could wait no longer. "Now then, Gretel," cried she to the little girl, "be quick and draw water. Be Hansel fat or be lean, tomorrow I must kill and cook him." Oh, what a grief for the poor little sister to have to fetch water, and how the tears flowed down over her cheeks. "Dear God, pray help us," cried she. "If we had been devoured by wild beasts in the wood, at least we would have died together." "Spare me your lamentations," said the old woman. "They are of no avail." Early next morning, Gretel had to get up, make the fire, and fill the kettle. "First we will do the baking," said the old woman. "I have heated the oven already and kneaded the dough." She pushed poor Gretel toward the oven, out of which the flames were already shining. "Creep in," said the witch, "and see if it is properly hot, so that the bread may be baked." And Gretel, once in, she meant to shut the door upon her and let her be baked. And then she would have eaten her. But Gretel perceived her intention and said, "I don't know how to do it. How shall I get in?" "Stupid goose," said the old woman. "The opening is big enough, do you see? I could get in myself." And she stooped down and put her head in the oven's mouth. Then Gretel gave her a push, so she went in farther, and she shut the iron door upon her and put up the bar. Good going, Gretel. Oh, how frightfully she howled. But Gretel ran away and left the wicked witch to burn miserably. Gretel went straight to Hansel, opened the stable door, and cried, "Hansel, we are free. The old witch is dead." Then out flew Hansel like a bird from its cage as soon as she opened the door. How rejoiced they both were, how they fell each on the other's neck and danced about and kissed each other. And as they had nothing more to fear, they went all over the old witch's house, and in every corner there stood chests of pearls and precious stones. "This is something better than flint stones," said Hansel as he filled his pockets, and Gretel, thinking she would also like to carry something home with her, filled her apron full. "Now away we go," said Hansel. "If we could only get out of the witch's wood." When they had journeyed a few hours, they came to a great piece of water. "We can never get across this," said Hansel. "I see no stepping stones and no bridge." "And there is no boat either," said Gretel. "But here comes a white duck. If I ask her, she will help us over." So she cried, "Duck, duck, here we stand." I never heard this bit of it. "Hansel and Gretel on the land, stepping stones and bridge we lack, carry us over on your nice white back." And the duck came accordingly, and Hansel got upon her and told his sister to come too. "No," answered Gretel, "that would be too hard upon the duck. We can go separately, one after the other." Seems an odd addendum. And that was how it was managed, and after that they went on happily until they came to the wood. And the way grew more and more familiar, till at last they saw in the distance their father's house. Then they ran till they came up to it, rushed in at the door, and fell on their father's neck. The man had not had a quiet hour since he left his children in the wood, but the wife was dead. And when Gretel opened her apron, the pearls and precious stones were scattered all over the room, and Hansel took one handful after another out of his pocket. Then was all care at an end, and they lived in great joy together. Sing, everyone, my story is done, and look round the house, there runs a little mouse. He that can catch her before she scampers in may make himself a very, very large fur cap out of her skin. Oh my gosh. Okay, these are so bizarre. I mean, I take it from what the inside cover said. Some people thought at the time they were bizarre too. You know, and I know some of this is, you know, you have to read things in their proper historical context and things, but I don't forgive the father, okay? Hot take. I wouldn't throw my children in the woods no matter how impoverished I was, right? Like, I mean, that's not any great sacrifice to put your children before yourself. I mean, my God. So, I mean, I guess we're all glad the evil stepmother died. The wife, they never say she's the children's mother. You know, we have all those evil stepmother tropes, I guess, from this type of story. And that's all fine. But this story makes a lot more sense, I suppose. I'm still a little bit at a loss about what the lesson it's trying to teach is, you know. And I don't think every story or book has to necessarily be teaching a lesson, but my understanding is that is sort of the point of these. And I don't know if I'm just dense, but is the lesson just that, like, being clever and, you know, sort of the children watching each other's backs, maybe, what the, you know, the thing for which they're being rewarded, I suppose, you know, something along those lines, because they get rich in the end, right? Yeah, strange story. I mean, awfully graphic and violent, but I don't think anyone doubts that the witch deserves to be burned alive. I mean, she's trying to eat children, so, you know, what can you say? Some of what I often feel in these, though, is it also just in terms of story, in terms of formula, the way the stories develop just don't always make sense. Like, she's trying to fatten up Hansel to eat him, but then all of a sudden she's going to kill the skinny girl who's been presumably starved this whole time before also eating Hansel. Like, we're not really using our resources efficiently, are we, Baba Yaga? I don't know. These stories are totally crazy, read in any sort of modern context, but yeah, some of them more than others. I'll probably do another video and keep reading them because I do think that it is good fun. Anyway, sleep well. Good night, good night, good night, good night, good night, good night, good night. The Night Court.